Hi guys, Robby here from CrossFit South Bend. I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit today about whether you should be eating carbohydrates, whether they are healthy for you, are they unhealthy for you? People ask me all the time, are carbs good, are they bad? You know, the answer here is it really depends. What we like to teach here at CrossFit South Bend is that there's no real class of foods like carbs and fats and protein that are all bad or all good. It really just kind of depends on what types you're talking about. You know, people in the 80s and 90s used to demonize fat, and they'd say, oh, well, you know, get food as low fat as possible and that will make you healthy. We've seen that that experiment hasn't exactly worked out the way we wanted to. Now, similarly, people are putting their faith in reducing carbs as much as possible. You've heard about things like the Atkins diet, that, you know, the goal is basically to minimize carbs as much as possible. But we have to ask, is this really good for us? Is this good for our health? Is this good for our well-being? Is this good for what we're trying to accomplish, maybe fitness-wise or performance-wise? So today we're going to try to give you some insight into whether you should be eating carbs and, of course, which kinds and what's going to be best for you. So first, let's talk about the distinction between good carbs and bad carbs. So in general, the good carbs, or the types of carbs that you're going to want to be eating that are good, that are healthy for you, are going to be the following three: non-starchy vegetables, starchy vegetables, and fruits. So let's talk about them just in a little bit more detail. Non-starchy vegetables just means foods that don't contain a lot of, or vegetables that don't contain a lot of carbohydrates. So these are going to be things that everyone's going to recognize. These are actually the vast majority of vegetables: broccoli, kale, cauliflower, carrots, zucchini, cucumber, lettuce, spinach, so on and so forth. These foods are really high in nutrients, really low in calories, very low in carbohydrates, and really you can just eat as many of them as you like as long as it doesn't upset your stomach or anything like that. They're just fantastically healthy for you. We tend to not eat enough of them, and I recommend that most people have at least one non-starchy vegetable with each of their meals. Now, starchy vegetables. Starchy vegetables are vegetables as well, of course, but they contain a little bit, excuse me, a little bit more in the way of carbohydrates. So these are things like white potatoes, sweet potatoes, plantains. There's some types of sort of tropical vegetables that some of you may have heard of, things called like cassava or tapioca. Those are all types of starchy vegetables that can be healthy for you. They're a little bit high in carbohydrate, but they can certainly be healthy for you, and we'll talk a little bit more about why in just a minute. And then lastly, fruits. Fruits are definitely part of a healthy nutrition plan. They're definitely not as nutrient dense as vegetables, but they can definitely be healthy, and they should be part of, you know, what you're eating. The big thing I like to say to people is don't let fruits push vegetables off your plate, and don't think that fruit juice is a substitute for real whole fruit. You want to make sure that you have fruit. So what makes those carbohydrates good carbohydrates? What makes them good is that they pass the following good food standards. Whenever we want to evaluate whether food is healthy for us or not, we want to make reference to these food standards. So first of all these carbohydrates are nutrient dense. They have lots and lots and lots of nutrients in them. Nutrients like vitamins A, D, E, and K, you know, certain minerals, you know, things like calcium and magnesium and iodine and selenium and copper and zinc and so on and so forth. So they're really nutrient dense. They tend not to spike your blood sugar. You know, one of the biggest problems we have today in our society is we have lots of people with blood sugar issues, people developing diabetes, kids developing diabetes. So we want to have foods that don't spike our blood sugar and then make it crash and then lead to cravings and all sorts of metabolic dysregulation. We don't want to have foods that are psychologically addictive, meaning that, you know, they're kind of calling out to you from wherever they may be. So whether you're in the grocery line, you see a candy bar and it's kind of calling to you, or you know, you're awake at night, you know, because you have some ice cream in the freezer that's kind of calling to you. Those are foods that are psychologically addictive. And in general, I've never met anyone who thought, you know, broccoli or kale or cauliflower were psychologically addictive. Those are good foods. They are delicious. They taste very good, but they're not psychologically addictive in the same way that these types of foods are. They're healthy on the digestive system. They have both, these types of carbs have both soluble and insoluble fiber, which is very healthy for your digestive system. And more importantly, they don't contain the bad stuff that can irritate your digestive system. These foods do not lead to chronic and systemic inflammation, which is the underlying cause of the vast majority of diseases that we deal with today as a society. And in general, they tend to be not just non-inflammatory, meaning that they don't lead to inflammation, but actually anti-inflammatory. They can actually calm down the inflammation that you're getting from other sources like lack of sleep or tons of stress or other sorts of issues that you might be dealing with. And lastly, these types of good carbs do not contribute to autoimmunity. These are types of diseases where your immune system is attacking your own body, things like multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis or Hashimoto's thyroiditis or certain types of diabetes. We don't want foods that contribute to that. So now that we've understood a little bit about why good carbs are good and what the good carbs are, let's talk a little bit about bad carbs and the carbs you should be avoiding. So in general, bad carbs are going to be things like processed foods. We talked about this a little bit in our last video. In general, good food goes bad, meaning healthy food decomposes because it's natural. Processed foods, which could stay on the shelf for eternity, probably not going to be as healthy for you. Excess sugar, sugar is in almost everything these days. If you look on the back of ingredient labels, it's in a lot of stuff. We want to try to avoid that. We want to try to avoid soda, which is basically just empty calories and lots of carbs. Alcohol, want to try to minimize, and grains, especially wheat. So why are these carbohydrates not quite as good? Because again, they do not meet these good food standards like the good carbs do. If you compared good carbs versus bad carbs when it came to nutrients, good carbs would beat bad carbs any day of the week. Bad carbs usually don't contain any nutrients at all, and if they do contain any nutrients, it's a very small amount. When it comes to blood sugar spiking, these foods make your blood sugar go on a roller coaster. They spike it up like a rocket ship and then it crashes down and it leads to all sorts of metabolic dysregulation. These carbohydrates, the bad ones, are psychologically addictive. They're the ones that the hardest to quit. Soda, alcohol, processed foods. People have really hard times quitting these because they have such a psychological hold on people. These foods can lead to upset digestion, things like heartburn, constipation, diarrhea, things that a lot of more people are dealing with today that we really want to try to avoid. These foods are incredibly pro-inflammatory. They lead to all sorts of chronic and systemic inflammatory issues, which can then lead to all different types of diseases, one of them being autoimmune diseases. Again, things like multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, so on and so forth. So we really want to avoid foods that are pro-inflammatory and instead focus on foods that are anti-inflammatory. Now that we have a sense of which carbohydrates are better to consume and which are probably not quite as good to consume, let's talk about how many carbs per day should you be eating. Well, just for a frame of reference, the normal American is eating 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrates a day. This is insane. And you have to put this in the context of most Americans tend to not have enough sleep. They tend to be really stressed. They tend to not be working out, so they're not, utilizing these carbohydrates as fuel for workout. And not only that, most of the carbohydrates are coming from this side of things. It's not like they're eating 300 to 400 grams of good carbs. They're eating 300 to 400 grams of bad carbs. So this is really just crazy. And to the extent you can kind of minimize this and avoid this, you will be a lot better off health-wise. So for most people, what should you be consuming? About 100 to 200 grams of carbs a day from healthy sources. This good carb list: non-starchy vegetables, starchy vegetables, and fruits. Now, how do you get to that number? How do you accumulate that throughout the day? Well, your non-starchy vegetables aren't really going to contribute to that. If you ate an entire package of spinach, let's say, that's really just going to contain a couple of carbs. It really doesn't have that many. So how do you get 100 to 200 grams of carbs a day? Things like white potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, plantains, winter squash, and certain types of fruit. So for reference, a medium-sized white potato or like a russet potato is going to be about 50 grams of carbs roughly. A medium-sized sweet potato, somewhere 40 to 50 grams of carbohydrates. So a couple of those a day, preferably after a workout, will do really well for you. If you want to try to lose a little bit more weight, probably closer to this 100 mark. If you want to, maybe put on size and muscle, or maybe perform well athletically, a little bit closer to this higher number. Now, if you're a hard charging athlete, someone who does lots of triathlons or marathons, or if you participate a lot in CrossFit or something like that, it's totally appropriate for you to have something like 200 to 400 grams of carbs a day if you're an otherwise healthy person who doesn't have blood sugar issues and your carbs are coming from good sources. That's entirely appropriate. I wouldn't recommend that to someone who was 300 pounds and had diabetes, but that's someone different from an otherwise healthy athlete. So a healthy athlete could consume this amount of carbohydrates per day as long as they come from the good carb list, the person doesn't have blood sugar issues, and they're otherwise healthy. Excuse me. Now, what about weight loss? For weight loss, maybe something like 75 to 125 grams of carbs a day would be appropriate. Dipping too much below that, especially for women, can start to set off a hormonal cascade that tends to make your body actually want to cling to fat rather than burn it. So you want to be careful that you're not going too low here, but somewhere around there from the good carb sources is going to be pretty appropriate for most people who are looking to lose weight. So hopefully, by now you have a good sense of what differentiates good carbs from bad carbs. You have a good sense of why carbs are neither good nor bad. It really just kind of depends on who you are and what you're trying to do. And you have a sense of how many carbs per day you should be eating based on who you are, what your goals are, and what you're trying to achieve. All right, guys, so this is Robby from CrossFit South Bend. I hope you found this video useful, and we'll see you guys next time.